Alright, so back to Boomingi's Man with Compound Eyes. So we're starting with the first part. Alright, so part 1 has the chapters The Cave, Attilie's Last Night, Alice's Last Night. Now, what we see this entire part, like if you were to sort of frame it thematically and sort of give it like common points, you'd see that it's about despair, it's about loss, it's about feeling disconnected. It's like you feel like you have nothing that's tying you down to the world. Alright, and it's both about the people and the land. So it's not just the people who are feeling disconnected, but the land itself seems to be sort of splitting apart from whatever it has known all this while as well. So there is a certain kind of physical change that even the land seems to be undergoing. Now we are introduced to Detlef, Atlee, and Alice in this particular part. All right, and through them we sort of hear about other characters, but we don't delve too much into them yet. Now the segment begins with this frightening sound of the earth, and it ends with an earthquake. So it's almost like, you know, a full circle. It's like those decisions you made, which we later find out happened 30 years ago, is what finally leads to this act of natural violence. Or is it violence? Is also different. Is also a question that comes up. It's the idea of the earthquake. Now, the cave itself is a nightmarish experience because you're at the heart of the mountain and the land seems to be groaning, and so you almost feel like you're in the presence of something preternatural. All right. Then we're also introduced to Atlee's Island, which is this isolated space, and but we're also told that sometime in the past, white man had visited, and we're not going too much about how and what happened as a result of it. That's sort of built on a little more as the stories progress, but we're kind of told that they have had that equation has not necessarily been positive for them. Then we're also introduced to the idea that he's a second son of the island, and the rule is that the second sons must leave the island. All right, that it's kind of like both the tribute, because you're supposed to offer yourself up to the sea, as well as the fact that the land cannot support that many people. There is only a limited number of people that can reside on that land, and everyone else, they need to push off. And it's specifically ordained that it has to be the second son. Now, then we have Alice. All right, so we're already told that she's lost her will to live. Here we're told that not only has she lost her will to live, she wants to kill herself. She wants to end her life. All right, and just when she sort of like, you know, cut off her possession, she has, you know, cut off contact with people. She's done all of these things, sort of isolated herself. When the earthquake happens, she's still startled. She's still sort of like, oh, should I run for cover? So the idea that there is this survival instinct within us, even if it looks like things truly seem to be falling apart. And it's true for nature as well. We're also brought up to, you know, us sort of engage with ideas like land ownership. Can that actually be a concept, and should we be sort of engaging with it? All right. Now, part 2, we have 2 chapters, Atlee's Island and Alice's House. All right. By this point of time, they are well and truly setting out on their respective journeys, metaphoric or real, depending on the equation. We also see that this particular part is about people trying to survive. All right, survival instinct. Like I said for the previous part, though she has been thinking about ending her life, when the earthquake happens, she is still startled. Her first instinct is, I have to run for cover. And then it's like, wow, why am I thinking that if this was my plan anyway? So it's also talking about maybe years of, you know, instincts that are sort of, you know, built into us and how we sort of respond to those things. Probably very interesting then to say where we sort of fall into in the scheme of things. There is a lot of discussion on climate change, the idea of the sea being sick, the land being sick. That's something like a continual reference that comes within the books. All right, and you have the idea that characters are very aware of the fact that there's no point in living, or there's no point in bringing new life into the world, or there's no point in having steady space to sort of depend on, and yet they are building homes. Yet they are establishing these structures that are so unsafe, unsteady, and yet there is this need to want to congregate in a place and find something that gives you comfort and safety. All right, and how, despite the fact that it seems like such uncertain space, you want to continue to survive. Like Alice's house, the sea is coming closer and closer. All right, but she doesn't want to abandon the house because there are memories attached to it, and also this idea that, it's like a fatalistic thing. Oh, sure, we built it here. If the sea comes, it's fine. Or even Atlee, when he ends up on the trash vortex, which is this floating mass of trash on the ocean, um, it does seem like a very unhygienic, unsavory space, but it's also a space that gives him, a point to sort of settle down and gather his bearings and sort of figure out what he has to do next. It may be a very unsteady space, but it has given him a moment of reprieve from being stuck out at sea, right? And it's also like for him, discovering that he can draw on things, he can write on things, it gives him a purpose to live, because there's very little holding him back, because he's almost like, there's a point where he's even thinking that, should I continue to live? But oh no, if I do something to myself, I'll become a jellyfish, and that would be horrible, because it's a belief system from Wayo. So he has to sort of find meaning. For Alice, it is discovering the cat that she names Ohio, which is basically good morning in Japanese, the idea of waking up to a new day, right? So she's finding a will to live. So that's really something that comes through here, and it's all like subtle statements that are being made for us. All right, now there is this comment that, by the way, comes right through the book. So I'm just going to read this out. Some folks shrugged it off by anthropomorphizing the disaster and running off at the mouth about the cruelty and inhumanity of nature. Now, what's interesting about this is that we're very quick to call or to lay the blame on nature, saying nature is reacting to it. So nature is getting angry with us, or nature is being violent. Nature is just being nature. All right. You have forced it into a point. It's not comfortable being there. It's just going to sort of push its way through. That's not nature being violent. That's just nature being nature. All right. We like to blame nature when convenient. We like to sort of take away from nature when convenient. Now, part 3, 2 chapters, Hafe 7 Sizit and Alice's Ohio. Both these segments, or this entire part, sort of focuses on the idea of loneliness and the search for companionship, and how you sort of go about trying to find something that gives you some way of connecting. We also are introduced to the idea of erosion. All right, so the violence of human activity on nature, which leads to certain natural principles to come into work. So we're told about how Alice's house, which is called the seaside house, is now becoming the sea house, because the sea has come literally to the door. All right, and in fact it blocks her entry and her exit. All right, we are also shown a few more characters. We are also interestingly told about grief. There's a lot of grief that is discussed in this section. We are shown how characters are grieving, but they're finding ways to survive. Whether it's necessarily healthy way of sort of surviving is a whole different thing, but there is a sense that we have to sort of make do. That comes through over here. We're also noticing that nature is changing dramatically in places. Like there are more earthquakes, there are more rains and landslides, and all kinds of such things are sort of occurring everywhere. So those are some things that also come up just when you're also talking about the changes in people's life or the grief in people's life. You're also talking about the grief of nature itself. All right. There is also a lot of talk about beauty and nature, how people are rarely exposed to the beauty of nature, but they're exposed to a plastic reality in which sort of warps their sense of, you know, the world itself, the beauty of the world itself, right? And we are also told that again, so tying up with what we discussed in the introduction, the idea of the local world, no more global but local, all right, where problems in another country become your problems. So, for instance, in page 80, there's this bit which comes up. The dust storms from China were getting more and more frequent the past couple of years, and even the relatively clear skies above eastern Taiwan are now filled with haze. They hadn't seen such a clear, starry night sky here in a long time. So all of these things, like things that are happening there, are affecting you. Even for instance, he leaves Vaio, he ends up on a trash vortex, and then because of ocean currents, he ends up crashing against the Taiwanese main island. So it's all of these things. It's like somebody else's concern. Maybe it's a landmass not connected to yours or slightly away from yours. It becomes your problem, right? You're not living isolated, all right. And we also see how it's small things like, just seeing life around you, giving you a chance to sort of live again, all right. One of the things that the novel constantly questions is the right to address nature in a way that, oh, nature's doing this or nature's violent. So that's something we already spoke about. But what it also does, which is really interesting, is to use natural metaphors to talk about grief, life, all of those things. The sense then being that we should not be talking about nature as something external to ourselves. We need to be talking about nature as something part of who we are. We are not isolated from nature. We are products of nature. The sooner we understand it, the less we will think about only in terms of loss and gain and things like that. We will start to sort of see it as, okay, we shouldn't do this because it's going to affect all of us. This is our united problem, right? And so we cannot be thinking in this kind of fashion. That is the idea that he seems to sort of very subtly pushing through in the book. Now, part 4, the chapters are Rasula, Rasula, will you really go to sea? Hafe, Hafe, we're going downstream. Dahu, Dahu, which way to now? Now, all of these chapters seem to connect on the idea of searching for meaning and for closure. All right, there's a lot of need and desire to find something to connect and center yourself with. All right, there is a lot of discussion of protesting against government redevelopment projects, protesting against, human violence against nature, a lot of those things. And there are also then statements being made that, sure, what you create, your industrial redevelopment may benefit a very small portion of society. But at the end of it, the violence that comes as a result of it, or the natural reaction of nature to that, would affect everyone, because there's a line in the book that says, water doesn't care if you're Aboriginal or Han. The idea that nature is not going to make those discriminations, even if you make economic discriminations amongst yourself, or cultural or social discriminations, nature is not going to do that. All right. And this is the first time that we are introduced to the idea of the man with the compound eyes. So in page 109, Hafe as a young child sees her mother talking to a man. Okay, it was a man. That man was big and tall, though I couldn't see him clearly. I felt he must be a young man, but he also seemed kind of middle-aged and youthful at the same time. He was just like a shadow, one moment big, the next moment small. I heard them and they seemed to be talking about something. For a moment his eyes met mine, and those eyes were, how shall I put it? It's hard to say. It was like a tiger, a butterfly, a tree, and a cloud looking at you all at once. I know it sounds crazy. Now, soon after that, when she asks her mother what was it or what happened. She says, Kavas has spoken, come with me. Kavas in the Pangka language means ancestral spirit. So the idea then being that you are now communicating with something that is clearly an embodiment of nature. So this is our first clue of the man with the compound eyes, that he's an embodiment of nature, of both the awe and the strangeness and the beauty and the wisdom of nature, all together. So it's a very dramatic statement. Now, we are also told that nature is changing. Nature is changing so dramatically that much of the knowledge that we already have about nature is becoming less and less valid, which is so true because we have a lot of age-old wisdom about how to interpret the world around us, that we know that by so and so time this will happen, or by so and so time that will happen, but those things are not set in stone anymore. All right, like if you're living in a city like Bangalore, you already know that, or you may have known that in certain months certain things are possible, but now you can't say those things anymore because something is changing so dramatically that you can't predict. Because once upon a time nature was easy to predict, even if it was unpredictable. Its unpredictability was easy to predict, but now there is no such thing because things are changing so dramatically that these things are no more in our control. And we also see how land sacredness is sort of being destroyed because people no more look at the land as a sacred, beautiful, wonderful thing that we must sort of respect. Like, for instance, the segment where Dahu's father tells him about the land. Without the mountain, what forest would there be for you to study? The forest is for us to hunt in and revere, not for us to research. All right? And at the same time, you have statements like, these mountains weren't like that. They remain mysterious, intuitive, like true mountains. Dahu often thought that when you start climbing a true mountain, common sense no longer applies. So the idea that land is still far more mysterious than we imagine it to be. We don't completely understand those things. But while we're talking about land, while we're talking about the beauty and the mystery of nature, we also realize that there are equally social, cultural constructs associated with it. Like communities that are so closely connected to nature are frequently discriminated against because they are seen as somehow being backward because they have a close connection with nature, which is the strangest thing because ideally the more connected you are with nature, the more knowledgeable you are about the world. And which is why when we have this, there's a segment about Dahu's father. Dahu's father was a good singer and hunter, but a failure in life on the plains. He often got depressed, lost control of himself, and got into fights with guys at the factory over little things. The idea that he may have such knowledge, such immense knowledge about the land around him, but in the eyes of the world, he's seen as nothing great. This is almost like Daya Pawar's Baluta, where you have the father is a talented, wonderful man who has so many abilities, but his caste status sort of decides everything. Decides how he's viewed, whether he deserves any respect, all of those things. And that's really unfair because we seem to have created a dichotomy between ourselves and nature, and thus anyone closer to the natural side is wrong, backward, flawed, and anyone closer to the human civilized side is somehow better. But that binary doesn't actually make sense. Now, part 5 has 2 chapters, The Vortex on the Sea, Another Island. This particular part, we have the idea of media attention on problems, all right? And the problems that media seems to be focusing on are things that seem so grand and big, but actually it's all these things started off small. Like, they are so fascinated with seeing the trash vortex crash, the coastline. They want to know what happens or what will happen when the trash vortex crashes on the coastline. But how about fixing the problem at stage 1, which is don't dump things? into the ocean. That should have been the starting point of it, but that's not the starting point. We are fascinated by the spectacular. This ties up with what Rob Nixon talks about in his book, Slow Violence and the Environmentalism of the Poor, where he discusses the idea that we always notice the grand event, the mushroom cloud. We don't focus on what's going to happen on the flip side of it. Like there's always going to be ground reality is going to be not grand, it's going to be depressing, despairing, heartbreaking. There's going to be everyday problems as a result of it. But that's not the focus of it. Like, for instance, we say, oh, this and this country went to war, and then, the peace treaty was signed. What happened post that? How did those countries recover post that? What is the problems that they dealt with after that? That's not the focus on it. And ironically, which is the best thing ever, which is when they're waiting to see the trash vortex crash, but there's a hailstorm, and so they end up missing out seeing the trash vortex crash. And it's kind of like the biggest joke on them, because it's like, oh, this is what you wanted to see. Oh, sorry, but you see, that's happening because you already ruined the world over here. So let's give you a preview of what you've already done. All right. And the idea is that the moment this whole thing happens, and up till this point of time, people vaguely seem to know that nature's struggling. But with this, it's kind of like, yes, nature is struggling. And we see it affecting people as well. Like, Atlee falls ill. All of these things happen. It's like, and Atlee is our one figure, even more so than Dahu and Hafe, who is truly connected to the land. All right? It's kind of like, again, to sort of tie up with the idea of how close to nature you are and how you are then viewed by people, all of those things. So Atlee is most closely connected to land, and thus interacting with the trash vortex does make him sick. All right. And we're told that nature itself is ill. In fact, there is a segment that comes up. Yes, this comes up in page 136. The sea was not the same color as when she was a girl. It was a bit darker and grayer, rarely glowing with its own light. It was like some despairing middle-aged woman one occasionally runs into on the street, who's been married a while and has now started to put on weight. All right. And while something is sick, there is still like a ray of hope, at least as far as Alice is concerned. For her, meeting Ohio is the ray of hope in her life, because there's actually a line that says, finding Ohio was like opening a door and letting in a ray of light. So nature is still giving you chances to sort of understand and fix the scenario, but it also boils down to how much are we really willing to listen, because it's shockingly easy for us to compartmentalize this and be like, is it really still a problem? Or maybe not. Maybe we can like think about it later. And in fact, how everyone approaches the trash vortex becomes a pretty good indicator of that. Like, the politicians are talking about how this needs to be cleaned up before the next election so they won't get elected, or other companies who are running this trash cleanup business are like, okay, let's dump the business and leave before it becomes a big issue for us. So self-interest dominates everything else. Now finally, part 6 has 4 chapters: Atlee, Alice, Dahu, and Hafe. This is a chapter where the house and the restaurant collapse. Alice meets Atlee for the first time. Alright, so we see a lot of these dramatic things happening over here. But actually those dramatic things were long predicted, right? And so we are seeing how land is being taken over by greed. But the price that's being paid for it is the people. The people are the ones who actually pay the price for it. Somebody else will, definitely make money of the entire thing. But the people are the ones who are going to pay the price for not having been able to protest the land. But actually, since we've been told about the whole petrochemical plant being, built at Alice's grandma's village, we realize that the people truly have no say in what happens around them. They just have to become puppets that dance to someone else's tune. So someone decides this is a profit-making place, they get the profit, they get the illness, because Alice's brother says that the grandmother died because of old age, but actually she was already falling sick because of the petrochemical plant. But that's not being discussed. And the fact that even people who are supposedly, well in tune to nature can also be very nonchalantly cruel. Like there is this section where Tom and the Who caught and killed a muntjac, all right, and they showed Alice a photo of the muntjac in the trap. It was still alive. The animal had a broken leg with an look of despair. Alice sensed its desire to live. That night she refused to make dinner for them. She felt angry at the men for their nonchalant attitude and because they had brought back the photo like a trophy or an interesting topic of conversation. And this is true. You can be closely connected to nature, but you can also be nonchalantly cruel towards it. This part does focus a lot on despair because you've lost home, you lost a space that sort of sustains and gives you a center. But it's also about finding meaning in a different place. We're also introduced to the idea of the forest church, which is a really interesting concept. The idea of forest being a truly spiritual place, which is technically how most ancient religions functioned. The idea of you turn to nature for the divine. All right, and that's where you really find meaning. So with this, we wrap up with our discussion of parts 1 to 6. We will continue with our discussion on parts 7 to 11 and conclude with our discussion on Man with Compound Eyes. Thank you.